interest in this one, but not everyone can get away for an hour at lunchtime. I just don't know how busy people are. But you will get a link to the recording and you will be able to download the two presentations. So that's all taken care of. You don't have to do a thing. So first of all, welcome to the first Child First Effective Practice Partnership webinar that we've running this term starting in 2024, the autumn. I am incredibly lucky to be joined by Karina from Hillingdon Youth Offending Service and the partners that serve Hillingdon, and also we have Ashley, who is joining us from Coventry. Um, both of our guests today are doing some really interesting work with their partner services, and this is the essence of what we're looking at today. Youth offending services cannot do the Child First heavy lifting alone. And so in both of these presentations, we're going to explore how relationships, powerful relationships with other partners can make things happen. Now, Karina will be doing the presentation first. I do know that she's got a bit of a weak internet connection. So I am going to share Karina's presentation and she will give me instructions as we move forward. So I am now going to switch now to the Hillingdon Youth Justice presentation. Karina, over to you. Thank you so much for helping us out today. If you could start off by saying who you are and what you do, and then tell me when to change the slides. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Marius. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Karina Jopkevich, and I am the Senior YJS Officer at Hillingdon Youth Justice Service, and I oversee education. So I do line manage our education officer. So I do have understanding of what we do in terms of our SEND department, education department, and our local providers. Cool. So next slide, please. So a little bit about Hillingdon. So Hillingdon is the second largest borough in London, and we're based near Heathrow. So we do get a lot of children who are trafficked. A lot of our children are arrested at the airport on warrants. And we also have a lot of asylum seekers. So that poses some barriers in terms of putting children into education. In 2022 and 2023, majority of our children were aged between 15 and 17. However, we have seen a massive increase in terms of the younger cohort. So we now have a lot of 11, 12-year-olds open to our service. Most common offence, violence against the person. We have a lot of children who are coming through for possession of weapons, including firearms, GBHs. So again, another barrier in terms of education and placing those children into ETE. We have achieved quality mark status in December 2019, and following improvements, we secured quality lead status with a Child First approach in 2023, so last year. So today I'll be sharing some information in terms of what we do and some tips. So we do have a speech and language therapist who works full-time with us, and we are quite lucky to have another speech and language therapist who actually started not long ago, and she does assessments for children who are open to preventative services. So they're already getting that SALT assessment before they even come through the criminal justice system. So that's very helpful because ET providers can then follow those recommendations and offer that additional support to those children. So our speech and language therapist delivers training to all YJS staff, and this includes all our volunteers, students, panel members, our security and court staff as well. And what's very useful is she also goes through every single report with everyone who works with that child. So every child who comes for our door is assessed by the speech and language therapist. And this also includes children who are in custody, because sometimes the speech and language therapist who's based in Feltham or Oak Hill, they might not have the capacity, so she goes and assesses all the children there as well. All YJS staff have been trained by the Autistic Society staff just to improve the understanding on how to work with autistic children and what strategies to put in place when delivering interventions. We also have weekly CAMS drop-in sessions for practitioners, and this is highly utilized. So this is just a general drop-in session, for example, when they're doing their formulations, or when they have a question about autism, ADHD, or just if they need to follow up and they don't want to wait for an email, they can have a face-to-face quick consultation. We also offer reflective supervision with CAMS, as well as monthly peer group supervision to all staff members. And this is YJS and early help and preventative team as well. And that is being utilized by all staff members. Specialists are also invited so they can share their reflections. Our education officer, she meets with the SEND and virtual school team managers on a monthly basis to discuss children who are open to both services, just to ensure there's the right support in place and all children who are open to SEND or virtual school are receiving the right support. And if the child is in need, what can we do as a team to actually support that child back into education? She also meets monthly with a local PRU to discuss children who are open to YJS and enroll with the local PRU to see if there's any concerns or if there's anything we can do to support, for example, with attendance or behavior. And this also reduces the risk of exclusions, further exclusions. Our restorative justice coordinator started delivering RJ trainings to local placements to reduce police callouts. And this is because we're trying to reduce the number of Black children being further criminalized. We've seen that a lot of the time, placement staffs are very quick to call the police when there's an argument or when the child breaks something in the house. So we've started offering RJ meetings with children and placement staff as well to resolve the issue or the tension there might be, and that's been quite useful. All SALT assessments are shared with education providers, followed by, there's a follow-up by the caseworker to ensure recommendations are being followed. And again, our SALT worker also does regular follow-ups. YJS officers are actively working with social workers and placements. So we often do monthly placement visit or sometimes even every single week to make sure we're working together and supporting that child. And YJS officers are also part of the placement searches, placement profiles, as well as grab packs. Next slide, please. Oh.
Sorry.
So in terms of our appointments, so most of our appointments take place in our YJS office, and we're quite fortunate to have a brand new office that's actually been designed by children as well as health team. So our speech and language therapist, she was part of the planning and decorations to make sure it's child friendly. All children who come to the office, they're searched by our security. And our security was actually trained in terms of like trauma and ASD as well. So he knows how to communicate with children who come through the door and who might be quite resistant to get searched. Appointments tend to be in the same room, and the rooms are quite plain just to avoid any distractions. Fidget toys, spinners, and whiteboards are being utilized during sessions to help children stay focused, but also during interventions when the child is a visual learner, sometimes they just need that additional drawing. And all intervention packs that we use have been reviewed by the speech and language therapist as well to ensure the right ones for children. In terms of our support plans, so each child completes the support plan with the YJS officer at the start of the order. And this is basically a pack that explores what the child likes, dislikes, the identity, any diversity needs they might have. And it basically asks them how they would like to be supported and what works for them and what doesn't work. And this just gives us a better insight of how to work with that child and how to build that positive relationship as well at the start. So each child receives a monthly calendar, and the appointments are scheduled 1 month in advance. Of course, some things can change, but we tend to like update and we try to stick to the same day and time as well, just to avoid confusion. And so everyone's clear when the child is due to attend. And we have also started doing a walking in our shoes training delivered by YJS children. So this was previously done by looked after children who shared their experience of what it feels like to be a looked after child, having different workers, social workers, and moving a lot. So we've introduced that for YJS children. So it's actually part of their reparation project now. And they basically deliver a presentation to our police officers, court team, other workers to basically help them understand what it feels like to be open to our YJS service and how it feels like to be arrested, regularly stop and search through their lens. Next slide. So working with SEND. So our ET officer meets with the SEND team and virtual school on a monthly basis, as mentioned before, to basically decide how we can work better and how we can support each child who's open to our services. Education healthcare plan recommendations are implemented within assessments, and our ET officer is now keeping a record of all the education healthcare plans that need to be reviewed. And then when she meets with SEND, she flags them up as well to make sure everything is in place and all the needs are met and reviewed as well. We also have something called the autism passport that's created by children with the worker. And this might be with YJS officer or health worker. And it's basically a card that says what the needs are and how the child might react and how they would like to be supported. And the idea is for the child to have this on them. So, for example, when they're getting stopped and searched or when they're approached by someone, they can show them the card to basically explain to the other individual, you know, I've got autism, this is how I would like you to talk to me or treat me. SEND officers and virtual school officers often join ET appointments as well, join the YJS review meetings as well, just to have that oversight and again, work together. And YJS ET officer also attends all the PEP meetings. If she can't attend, then the YJS officer attends. And we have also set up an ET forum for the local YJS ET workers, so they can all meet and discuss what works in the area, share providers, discuss any barriers or difficulties they might have, and come up with solutions. So in terms of our NEET children, so we are now AQA registered. So we do offer short-term courses to children based on their likes and interests. And again, this is where the support plan comes into place. So the AQA is basically to give child some confidence that they can achieve and they can get that sense of achievement as well. AQA is also delivered during some reparation projects, again, just to give children that extra boost of confidence. And we have a building resilience program that's being delivered to NEET children just to explore what the barriers are. And the aim is to get them back into education at the end. So the last session is actually delivered at the school. ET officer also works closely with local schools. So she meets with the safeguarding lead monthly, depending where the child goes to school. She attends the fair access panel as well to promote and advocate for children who are NEET. And she also works with children on a one-to-one basis where she takes them to colleges or does applications with them to just support them further. So in terms of our barriers, key barriers are resources. We are the second biggest borough, but we don't actually have a lot of providers in our area. So most of the time, children have to travel to South London, East London, and that takes about an hour. So you can imagine, all the barriers and difficulties we're facing. Colleges, they have introduced no knife policy. So getting children with a knife crime conviction is very difficult. And now other local colleges have also introduced that policy as well. So even though the policy might be in place, we have noticed that if the YJS officer or the ET officer actually attends with that child during the enrollment, we have had some successes as well. It just depends how well we can advocate on that child's behalf. And again, what can we put in place to mitigate the risk as well? There's a lot of postcode issues as well. So where we are based, we only have one PRU, and it's basically in the rival area. So not all children feel safe attending the PRU. So again, that increases the number of NEET children. We do have a lot of issues in terms of exploitation, missing episodes. So again, it's working together with placements and finding virtual ET providers and courses online for those children. And again, another barrier is looked after children. And this is because those children tend to move quite frequently. So this is why we introduced RJ training for placement staffs, just to prevent children from being the placement being terminated, and to keeping those children in the area as long as we can. And that's it from me.
Karina, that was absolutely superb, and there were various highlights I'd love to pick you up on, but we'll wait until we hear from Ashley. But thank you so much. That was really, really, really informative. So Ashley, please, over to you. I think you're okay for sharing your screen, so we'll go with you. Fantastic. That looks lovely. And Ashley is going to talk a little bit about how they are working to secure positive ET outcomes for some of the most needy children that come through the system. Thank you, Ashley. Over to you when you're ready.
Thank you. Once it goes through. So, hi all. My name's Ashley Cownings. I am the education lead for Coventry Youth Justice Service. I'm just going to talk to you about a couple of things that I've done working with schools to increase and better deepen relationships and securing positive education outcomes, really, for some of the young people that come into our service. So the first one I'd like to speak to you about, I did say a little bit of a deep dive into permanent exclusions and links with the youth justice, particularly on, as Karina said, about knife crime and how schools have a blanketed plan to permanently exclude as soon as a knife is found in schools. So just to set the scene for you, so I was asked to review all the children who have been permanently excluded that entered the Coventry Youth Justice Service, and then consider some of the points of learning that we could learn, but then also could be shared with providers and partnerships across the city to again secure those positive outcomes. So once I drilled into looking at and identifying the exclusions, I identified 6 young people who had been permanently excluded in the year 22-23, where it had been put down as an offensive weapon, which was the reason given. I discovered that the Coventry young people who entered the Youth Justice Service, that some children, actually came into us, but there was no suspension or permanent exclusions were applied for that young person. So the only deterrent was to come into the Youth Justice Service. So it's about what was that particular school or those particular schools doing to not permanently exclude where others were, and how we could then reinforce that going forward, really. So looking at the data, 6 students were permanently excluded that year for an offensive weapon, 2 girls and 4 boys, 5 different schools, and no one had identified any special educational needs. None of the 6 cases involved actually had a weapon to use to harm anyone else. 4 of them presented the knife in school, 1 admitted to the possession, and 1 actually had the weapon outside of school. but then was still permanently excluded because they're in the school uniform. Just a caveat on top of that, one of these actually permanent exclusions was actually self-harming in school as well, which we did some work with the school to unpick that a little bit further. So 2 of the 6 were back into mainstream quite soon after working with the Coventry Extended Learning Centre, and then again another 4 at the time attended the Coventry Extended Learning Centre. Out of the 6 students that were permanently excluded, 4 came into the Youth Justice Service through that pathway. 17 children actually were found to have a knife that year, had a knife offence on them. 4 again were permanently excluded. 9 had a suspension on their record. 3 of the students that entered the Youth Justice Service had a direct referral for knife possession. But no suspension or exclusion was on their record again. So reached out to those particular schools and looked at what they were doing differently to other schools and how we could learn from that. And then, like I've already said, some were excluded for having incidents outside of school. On a positive, 59% of the young people that came into our service received an outcome 22, which is a deferred prosecution. So as long as they completed all the work with ourselves, it was closed. And then there's just a bit of a breakdown about white British, other white British, Black Caribbean, Black African, the breakdown for that. So we took some learning points away, and I took this to the Youth Justice Board. Obviously, schools and academies have different starting points to how they deal with offensive weapons in schools, and it's about working with those schools to try and modify that and to see what we can do to support them. So if the school ethos and policy and the application of policy is blanketed, we looked at how each case was judged. Was it case to case? Where a couple of those actually were different to the school policy. So again, there was a little bit of a grey area. So it's how we worked with those schools to identify and work going forward. We looked at where their mental health needs come in to that. And we also recognise that as a service, we can influence potentially, but we can't control. The control of the school has complete autonomy with that. And then looking at the knowledge of services and how different services can support schools to not exclude them that were found in a possession. So we're looking at how we're building relationships with police and to access agencies, and then improving consistencies to offer an approach across schools in Coventry. Some more learning points. So we're also finding that possession of a weapon or knife is increasing in Coventry, but each case is individual and there is a backstory. Some find knives because of leaving them in bushes. Some use it as protection. Some are very naive. So it's a case of understanding those points. And then if a possession of a weapon, to have a look at where the Youth Justice Service can get involved in earlier before there is permanent exclusion considered. And that's something that we're doing as a cross-city partnership. So we're looking at raising awareness to schools of how the Youth Justice can offer our support, building confidence in the offer, and then sharing positive feedback with other schools as well about how it's actually helped them. So that was a little bit of a deep dive into that. And then I'd like to share with you another deep dive that I did on attainment. So as we all know, attainment and being in school is a huge deterrence for young people. I'll just get to the slide. Right. Yeah, so I did a little bit of a deep dive into attainment and progress, and look how that compared to Coventry and nationally. After doing this, I'm actually supporting 2 other youth justices across the country for them to do a similar deep dive, because the outcome looks negative, but at least we've done it and we can know how we can support schools, and the actual schools are now, through doing this and how I've worked with schools, are actually changing where they're putting their resources in secondary schools specifically. So looking at Coventry, looking at from Key Stage 2, firstly, so Key Stage 2 year 6 data, if you're looking at children, so I took a sample group, it's around about 45 children. The percentage pass rate for Coventry Youth Justice was just over 46%, whereas Coventry and nationally it was 70%. Maths is similar, and same as writing. And I won't go into the details, but the average scaled score for each child was 98, and to pass it's 100. So even before they come into the Youth Justice Service at 11, it looks like a lot of these children are behind. And by doing this data, we're looking at, okay, how can we share this across the city so people can understand it, schools can understand it, and therefore, rather than be reactive, be proactive into stopping this, and then obviously stopping them coming to the Youth Justice Service. If you're looking at progress from Key Stage 1, all 3 areas against Coventry were -3 progress points from the sample group that I took. So even from Key Stage 1, so year 2 to year 6, the children are starting to get behind, and as we know, that is a factor for them to starting to commit crimes. Then when they go into year 7, obviously we know year 7, 8, and going into secondary school is a huge difference for them. But you're looking at 1 in 5 were passing maths when they went into Key Stage 4 and then took their GCSEs, and 1 in 4 were passing their English. Not many. Under 1 in 5 were coming out with 4 GCSEs, whereas nationally you're looking at, pushing 70% for that. So my initial findings, looking at, rough progress across maths and English, you're looking at only 10% in each one made expected progress from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 4. So there was a difference of, 25% in roughly in maths and English, which shows there's something that needs to be done rather than years 10 and 11, and looking at what can be done. Schools can do that with support across the city, really. So I looked at, and again, developing that a little bit further. With that sample group, 46% had an SEN need, so an EHCP, or they had it as a primary or secondary need. Some they had more than 2 needs. And then I underdid a case study of one particular young person who, from years 2 to years 6, was a extremely high attainer. He came out with he was in the top 5 percentile of the country. He was a pupil premium child, free school meals. He was classed as gifted and talented. He didn't have any SEN status, no provision, white British, no exclusions from school, but he was a previous child protection and child in need. So as you can see here, Key Stage 1 showing he was a high retainer, having 2A and level 3. So that is a high retainer. Then went to Key Stage 2. He was a high retainer in reading and maths, where he's at the standard in writing. And then going through school, I unpicked each year. I shared this with our board about what happened from reception all the way through to year 11. And he actually only came out with maths. He got an English grade 4, and he was predicted 7+ in those grades. When I did a consultation with school, they said he could have probably got a 7 in year 8. So we've now put something in place in that particular school. Again, talking about resources, are actually, rather than putting their resources in year 9, they've actually changed the way they approach, and they understand that they're going to have a negative effect for a couple of years, but they want to sustain and have a prolonged outcome, and they're actually looking at the year 7 and putting their resources into that to support any of the young people going forward. So looking at what we do now, based on a couple of these, so the Youth Justice Service are working with Coventry Alternative Provision, where secondary schools are buying in physically and metaphorically into an alternative provision rather than excluding. So there is a process where a young person is referred into Coventry Alternative Provision, and then they will be deemed necessary whether they need support. And there's a tier system. There's 3 different tiers depending on the severity of the need really, and what interventions needed. And Coventry Youth Justice is part of that to be put into on our diversion programme. So it's a core targeted pathway for young people, and schools have already said before they were just putting things and trying things as a tick list rather than actually focusing in on the young people. And most of our schools in Coventry secondary schools, I think barring 3, have actually bought on to this. So it's changing behaviours as a school, looking at how the children come first, and therefore potentially stopping permanent exclusions going forward. Schools still have the autonomy. Schools can still make that choice, but it's a case of how we can work together to reduce this. Also, on the back of both of these, we're working with school panels. So directing schools and police panels, directing schools and supporting schools on how they can get access to Coventry Youth Justice Service and our interventions. So to create effective joint working between schools, the police, and then our key partnerships, and then generally supporting schools, so giving them an understanding on children who enter the Youth Justice Service, and then looking at their attainment outcomes. So schools then obviously, if they understand the attainment outcomes of children who access Youth Justice Service, if they've got 5 young people who enter in one particular year group, it looks like one of those are going to pass their GCSEs. So schools are now starting to almost red flag like an SEN need, that if they come into the Youth Justice Service, there needs to be extra interventions for that child in school as well as out to be able to support positive outcomes going forward. So yeah, we're looking at schools are now targeting children in those crucial years of years 7 and 8 rather than delaying it, and then obviously it's too late really. So yeah, that's something that I've done and the Youth Justice going forward, and thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, both Karina and Ashley. I have some points to make, but we do have some questions and queries. So I'll take those first of all. Jane Harris, to host some panelists. Did you follow the children who had not been excluded for carrying a knife into school and their outcome compared to those that had been excluded? Was there something tangibly different? So we'll start off with you on that one, Ashley.
Yeah, so the 2 people that didn't get excluded was from 2 particular schools. They still came into us, so they did a 12-week intensive intervention with ourselves, and then we liaised with school, and then that's just created a positive outcome. One of those was quite a severe one, to be perfectly honest. It wasn't just a normal knife; it was quite a big cutting knife. And it was a case of the young person took it in because of protection. So the school, working with the school, we were able to obviously understand why they didn't permanently exclude or take any sanctions, and they were able to put that into the police and then come into us for our interventions.
Brilliant. And Andrea Nesbitt, who's actually doing a Child First research project. She's working at the moment. She says, I'm working on point how children think education training is important to them for a positive future. How have you included the child's voice in your evaluation, especially their thoughts about carrying offensive weapons? Because, of course, a lot of it comes down to their thinking, doesn't it? And balancing, I suppose, protection and issues about knife crime against the value of education. Did anything come out of your research on that, please?
And not massively. Obviously, all children that come into our service that have carried a knife do the knife crime prevention program, which is an intensive six session program as an understanding for that really. What was the second part of the
No, it
question?
was basically, your thoughts about how the children balance out the need to be educated against the need to protect.
Yeah, I think that's the biggie really. And some people, some of the young people that have entered that have done the knife crime didn't know. They've learned how to protect as well, as in protect others if they've been stabbed, and what to do there as well. Obviously, knife crime is increasing, and then West Midlands have obviously have taken that forward. West Midlands Police holding knives.
Yes. And this is it. This is the backdrop in which young people operate within the social media that they live in, and how they feel about their own lives and where they are. Thank you so much for that. Karina, I'd like you to bring you in because there's a couple of things from your presentation that I got really quite excited by. The first one I'd love you to describe a little bit more in detail was your RJ work, your restorative justice work with placement providers. I know in some parts of the country, placement providers call out the police at a drop of a hat, sometimes 12 times a day, to deal with it. How is that restorative work being done with these placement providers? Are you seeing any positives coming from it? Karina, please.
Yes, so this started, so we do have a young boy, I believe he's 14, he's autistic, ADHD, education healthcare plan, and he's experienced a lot of ACEs, a lot of trauma, and frequent placement moves as well. So sometimes he doesn't even unpack because he knows he's going to move, which is really sad. So we started doing some restorative justice work with his placement. And our RJ coordinator actually delivered a training to all staff members to educate them on restorative justice and our options. And I believe our health worker, actually one L&D officer as well, attended to actually educate the placement about his needs. They had the SALT report as well with recommendations, and our speech and language also met with his key workers to actually explain how this child needs to be supported and what the triggers are. And it's been really positive because they did have a RJ conference, this child and his key worker, and it was really successful. And we actually have seen a reduction in displacement calling the police.
Superb. That's music to my ears. The trouble, I think, though, with RJ work, and I speak from experience as being a head teacher, we were one of the first schools in Bristol to take on RJ work. And another partner secondary school had it. In our school, it worked, but in the other school, it didn't. Because RJ was parachuted into a chaotic social construct. In other words, what happened in RJ meetings was almost weaponized. So, I think your approach helps because you are working with everyone in that small community to work in an RJ way. But my fear is that if it's just done in isolation, the chaos around it could lead to worse. But thank you for that. The other thing I took out from it was this idea of an autism passport that a child can carry around with them and use if they need it. How's that going? Because first of all, the young person needs confidence that they can produce it and that it will be understood and that it will be accepted. So, of course, there's work to be done with the police as well as the young person. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? That sounded really interesting.
Yes, so I think the issue is a lot of our children are getting diagnosed very late. So it's very sad because they have to come to YJS to actually receive the right diagnosis. I actually had a boy who got diagnosed last week at the age of 17, and it's very sad how no one has picked up on his symptoms. So this autism passport, like I said, is basically a card. Not many children want to do it, but we offer to everyone, and it's basic key facts about the child, that they're autistic, and it's mainly for police to understand that the child may lash out not because they're being antisocial or anti-police, but it's because of their additional needs. We still need to work with children to remind them to use it and actually encourage them to have one, because there's a barrier that we're trying to explore at the moment. But in terms of police as well, we do ask our YGS police officers to put a marker on the PNC to flag out that the child has additional needs, even if they're going for an assessment.
Yes.
Fully diagnosed. We try to encourage that, just to bring that to our attention. Also, when the child is arrested and in custody, we do make that contact with a police custody, just to share all the needs and everything they need to know about that child.
Just wondering, have you got a branding or something on it that sort of says Hillingdon Youth Offending Service, or how does it work?
No, so it's created by the child.
Got it.
They designed their own.
Oh, that's marvellous. Again, that idea of co-construction comes through all the time. So the final point, leading nicely on from what you've just said, walking in our shoes training. How lovely. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think, again, this is bringing the child's voice alive to all the professionals who might work. Please.
Yes, so it's a new project, and it's actually delivered by our reparation officer. She meets with children way beforehand to prep them, to basically interview them, find out about their experiences, and to capture the voice. Some children on the actual day, they might not feel confident talking about their experiences. So this is why she keeps a record of everything they said, and she basically quotes them. And it's in front of professionals who do have that power, and they can make changes. So local police officers, is just to improve their insight and actually help them understand what that child is going through. So
Yes.
we're hoping that when they see our child and they have to make an arrest, is for them to actually think back of that training and that they're just children.
Brilliant. No. Right then, coming near the end of our presentation, this is an invite to everyone who's on the call, and we're so fortunate to have a number of people on the call. I would love you to, if possible, in the chat pane, just type something, an insight or an idea that you have got from today's workshop. That would be really good for us. And there's an additional challenge. I'm going to put this to each of our panelists first, and that's come from a dear friend of mine and colleague, Dr. Alex Chard. For some of you who might know Dr. Alex Chard, he's done some amazing work across the West Midlands, and was the author of a report called Punishing Abuse, which basically showed that nearly every child who had a complex case in the history of criminalisation had a backstory which was tragic, and we seem to be punishing the abuse that those young people had. Alex is challenge to all of us, and I'll put it to Karina first, and then Ashley. What advice would you give Keir Starmer on reducing knife crime? What advice would you give Keir Starmer on reducing knife crime? So, Karina, what would you say to him if you had him in the room in front of you now?
I love it how I have to go first. I think the massive barrier is not understanding what children are going through. And I would probably invite him to actually sit down with our children and get to know them and understand the fact that a lot of them don't receive the right support at home, or they just don't, they feel really detached from the family. And this might be because their parents are on lower income, they just have to work extra hours, night shifts as well. So there's less of supervision, but also there's a lot of poverty in areas, and most of the children, they come to me and they say, we know it's wrong, but we just feel that we have to provide for our parents and we have to support our parents. And it's very difficult to hear. And I think spending time and actually understanding teenagers and what they are going through would be a starting point.
Lovely. Thank you. Ashley, you've had 30 seconds to think about it.
Lovely question, really. I mean, I was going to go down the exact same lines, educate him around why children carry them at the start, because it's not just to carry it to be big, hard, tough, to use it, a lot what we find is, especially for younger children, you know, that 12, 13, 14 in Coventry where there is a gang problem, they're worried about what the consequences are if they don't carry a knife. As we all know, that if you carry a knife, the chances of you actually getting stabbed yourself increase. But that's the education to the children. But for Kia, it would be educating him and actually looking at the reasons behind it to then obviously take action on those specific cases rather than just a blanketed, this is what we're going to do.
I couldn't agree more. Some lovely comments coming through. Haley from Camden said they've got a specific program now called Deferred Exclusion, which they're promoting to schools to try and prevent exclusion. So that's a lovely initiative in Camden. Camden. Ruth from Isle of Wight says thank you so much for sharing great ideas. Gary said put policy and resource decision makers into the shoes of those living in challenging areas. I loved taking Ofsted inspectors on a learning walk around my community. It was always interesting when we bumped into Mr. Adams, who would be bare-chested in his driveway with his baseball bat. All right, Mr. Frank. All right, there, sir. You know, and we have Tracy Tracy Binsley. We have an action point to check with our youth justice police officers to put markers on PNCs. We're just working on a communication passport, so great to have some ideas. Gary, if their children were in the same circumstances, the policy decisions would surely be very different. What a wonderful way to finish today. Panelists, thank you. Karina and Ashley, that was enlightening, inspiring, and hugely informative. And thank you also for the attendees today. Having you here on the call makes this all possible. Everyone who has registered for this will get a recording, which you can share with your colleagues and share widely within your youth justice wider teams, and you will also get the slides. So fantastic, thank you, and we look forward to the next one, which will be in November, after we have the YJM, the Association of Youth Offending Team Managers annual general meeting in Birmingham, where I hope I'll meet some of you who have got quality lead status in the last year, and I'll be able to give out a certificate in person. So it'll be a pleasure. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you to Azadeh from Microlink for making this all possible, who will be stopping the recording. We'll all leave, and we all hope you'll get a bit of lunch. Thank you very much, everyone.